starting with inclusive benefits that strengthen our workplace. To kick us off, this session really highlights how Progyny is expanding access to fertility, family building, as well as women's health, helping organizations support diverse paths to parenthood, improve employee well-being, as well as build a more inclusive workplace. We're so pleased that joining us this morning is Carol Nojane. Carol is the Senior Vice President of Strategic Sales and Growth at Progyny. With more than 25 years of experience at the intersection of healthcare and employer market, Carol helps lead high-performing teams delivering innovative fertility and family building benefits to organizations nationwide, helping employers improve outcomes, expand access to care, and build support for their people. So please join me in welcoming Carol.
Thank you so much, Aisha. Thank you, everybody. Can everybody hear me well?
Yes.
Yes? Great. Please feel free to interrupt at any point. I am so happy to have this conversation. I am so pleased and honestly proud of Inclusion Maine and what you have established here. The opportunity for us to have the space for these discussions is extremely important. And I welcome all of you to ask any questions during the call. You can go off mute and ask questions. You can ask them in the chat box, and Aisha will at least interrupt me and let me know, because I would love to answer any questions or have any discussions that you would like. To let you know a little bit about myself and really anchor in why this is so important to me personally and why I'm so passionate about it. Some of you who may know me, when I joined Progyny about 3.5 years ago, were really surprised that I joined Progyny, specifically because I do not intend to have children. At the time, I did not intend to have children, and everybody thought that that was a little bit of a weird marriage. But those that really know me understood why I joined Progyny. So to tell you a little bit about myself, where I came from, and why I'm on this path. I was born and raised Lebanon, the country, and I usually have to say the country because we have a Lebanon in almost every state in the United States. And I was raised there until I was about 11. And we moved to the States during the last part of the Civil War. And being the eldest daughter in my family, as you can imagine, some of you who are perhaps the same, I had to help my entire family navigate the ecosystem. And that was a plethora of ecosystems. And the one that was most difficult to navigate was the benefits space in this country. And as I sort of went through the process and the years of being that navigator for them, it frankly did not get any easier when I learned to speak English. It didn't get any easier when I graduated from college, from Wesleyan University. And it frankly didn't get much easier when I got into this benefit space. So for that reason, as I started to think about what do families that do not have eldest daughters that work in the benefit space in healthcare, what do they do? How do they navigate? And I started to sort of uncover the fact that without access, without affordability, and without accountability from who you're buying from, the system wasn't working. And we had to get to a space where we sort of flipped the script on how we deliver care in this space in order to really bring value to all of the stakeholders, but especially for members to be able to garner them access, affordability, and accountability. And that is what I based my whole career on. So to sort of close the circle a little bit, the reason I joined Progyny is because Progyny is doing exactly that. And we'll talk through today what that looks like from an operational perspective, what that looks like from a delivery perspective. And again, I thank you for giving me this space and for this conversation. And like I said, please feel free to interrupt at any point. May we go to the next slide, please? So what I want to do over the next 20 minutes or so is really walk you through three things that have become incredibly visible and really crucial in this space. First, I want us to talk about what's really happening beneath the surface when it comes to women's health and family health in the workforce and the dependencies of those things. As our CEO says, women are the CEOs of their families, and we have to be able to add value to them as a stakeholder in order to really be able to maximize our impact on the family. So that's number one. Second, I'd love to talk to you about why many of the solutions that we've invested in aren't delivering the outcomes we expect. And this is something that is very near and dear to me specifically because I spent over 25 years with Mercer and Lockton, really being able to evaluate these solutions and their associated ROI to my clients for so long. And we've seen in the past 10 years or so this massive input into the space of solutions that have promised the world. And unfortunately, only a handful have been able to deliver on that. So, as fiduciaries of what we do and as the responsible owners of what we are putting in place for our members, that has to become really important as well. And third, what it actually looks like to design benefits that are inclusive, effective, and truly move the needle for both employees and organizations as a whole. If you look at the number of solutions that employers are desperate to add into their ecosystem because they are desperate to help their members, sometimes you sort of exchange quantity for quality. And I think what we need to do and what is extremely important is not just put in solutions and throw things up against the wall and hope they work, but really be able to understand from the perspectives of the members what is going to add value for them? What is going to make access easier for them? What are they going to be able to afford? And most importantly, who is delivering the solution and how are they being held accountable to that solution? And we are extremely proud at what we do at Progyny, and I would love to show you a blueprint of how we've been able to do that. If we go on to the next slide, please, if we start sort of with the reality, and like I said, please feel free to interrupt me and ask any questions that you have. But as we've looked across the workforce, we're seeing a significant shift in health trends, and they're not going in the right direction. And I think you could say that almost every single lateral, whether you're talking about family building, cancer claims, maternity, MSK. We are seeing that there's a plethora of solutions that are being added into the ecosystem, but at the end of the day, we are seeing increases across all of those cost categories. So, as an example, if we look from 2016 to 2023, there was so much money in this space. There were so many solutions coming into this space. Everybody was super excited about how we're going to do things differently. But during that time period, we've seen increases in preterm births. We've seen increases in maternity complications, and NICU admissions are up about 13%. And when a baby ends up in the NICU, we're talking about an average stay of about 2 weeks. So imagine what that does to a young family. And then imagine the costs associated with that, which is about $70,000 to $80,000. That is life-changing. And at the same time, we're seeing that about 60% of individuals are entering pregnancy in poor health, which to me says we're not handling an early intervention appropriately and we're not looking at underlying chronic conditions appropriately. We are seeing that fewer than 1 in 6 are actually receiving preconception care. And we do not live in a third world country. That number should not be the case. That should be closer to 6, especially since the majority of the population does have access through some employer coverage. And then, as many of you will probably tell me, and I have not experienced this myself, but 90% of parents are reporting burnout. And then there's menopause. Why did everybody just look at me? I feel like you guys know that this is something that is near and dear to my heart. Um, but then there's menopause. And it impacts employees in their late 30s and 40s, often at the peak of their careers, and it's associated with significantly higher healthcare spend and workplace disruption. And we're not talking about this being a clinical issue, which is, it absolutely is. The cost and the time associated with diagnosing things that have to do with menopause has increased significantly in the past few years. We are now have the awareness to look into it, but as you look at menopause, the opportunity to get access to a doctor that can really synthesize one of the 30 or so menopause symptoms that a woman may have is really, really important. And the opportunity to do that is helping, but it's also uncovering gaps, areas of gap that we've had before. So it is a clinical issue, but it's also a workforce issue because when these needs go unsupported, employees are going to disengage, they are going to struggle, and in many cases, they are going to leave. And we have seen the studies on that. Next slide, please. Now, the good news is that there's more attention on this than there ever has been, as I sort of intimated. Organizations are investing more, there are more vendors, there are more solutions, there's more innovation, and there's been a tremendous amount of investment. But again, that hasn't translated into better outcomes. So innovation is wonderful, but it has to be focused, it has to be structured. And in my opinion, it has to add value to all of the stakeholders within the system. For us specifically, our stakeholders are our clients, our members first and foremost, but then also our providers. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And if at any point any of those stakeholders are not receiving the value promised by Progyny, then the system falls apart. And unfortunately, that is when the members suffer the most. So at 10,000 feet, many of the solutions are looking the same. But again, when you look under the hood, you see what's real, you see what's marketing, and you see where the solutions that do not have access, affordability, and accountability are falling. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about a little bit more about why they are falling short. We've talked about the challenge is not the lack of solutions, right? It's the lack of accountability in them. So first, let's talk about point solutions. Organizations have had multiple vendors. Unfortunately, the vendors do not connect. They create fragmentation. And even those clients and organizations that are most focused on this. And what I mean by that, I've worked with several organizations that have gotten all of their vendors in one room, that have given them examples of member situations and have said to them, you three or four work in a group and you tell me how are you going to meet the needs of the vendor in a non-fragmented and integrated way, and have sort of forced their vendors to work with one another. And even in doing so, that's not always fruitful. But again, if you look at what is happening from an organizational perspective, the majority of organizations, A, don't have the time for that, B, don't have the buy-in from their vendors, and C, don't have the bandwidth or the resources to stay on top of it and ensure that that is happening. So that is the first area, first concern with point solutions. You look at telehealth. Certainly helpful. The fact that I do not have to leave my house to go to a physical therapist appointment has been phenomenal. But it's often episodic and it's not really focused on the high risk populations that are driving 80% of your cost. And then you look at traditional health plans. If you look at health plans historically, they do two things really, really well. They build massive networks and they adjudicate claims. What they don't do, unfortunately, sometimes, and that's because they cannot do that for every single one of their benefits, they don't ensure that the providers in the network are always the ones that are driving the most value. They do not add value to them by providing them with resources and technology to ensure that they're elevating practice patterns. And they're not providing the providers, the doctors with any sort of help in terms of how they engage with their members. And you'll see how we do that. The second piece that they don't do is the relationship with the member. As I'm sure you've heard of the stigma and you've experienced it, no one really wants to call their health plan to talk to them about what's happening to them in their personal home. There needs to be a more intimate relationship that is established with an advocate, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So if we look at health plans, empirically, they lack specialization, flexibility, and engagement. So the system overall looks strong, but what outcomes are you able to tie to that? If we go to the next slide, I want to focus a little bit and anchor us in equity, because this is where the inclusion becomes real. Equal benefits do not mean equitable access. And I know that I'm in a forum right now where you all understand this, that not everybody needs the same things in order to be able to achieve the same outcomes. Unfortunately, the majority of our space is still struggling with this understanding a little bit, and that is why we need to be able to close that gap, provide equitable access, and explain why giving everyone the same thing is not going to always be the best use of resources. And it's frankly not going to set them up for success. Geography matters. Many fertility clinics in our space are concentrated in urban areas, making access difficult. How do we solve for that? Race and ethnicity matter. Black women are twice as likely to experience infertility, yet significantly less likely to receive care. And LGBTQ plus individuals often require specific care, specialized care to build their families, but those services are not always covered or designed with them in mind. So if you think about one of the most sort of old school law that we had to get over was the fact that you had to have an infertility diagnosis in order for the health plan to pay for your care. An infertility diagnosis was heterosexual intercourse for 6 months without success. As you can see, a homosexual couple is never going to meet that definition, and that was extremely limiting. I know Maine specifically has done things around the diagnosis in order to ensure inclusivity, and I really, really hope that that becomes the norm in our country. So what happens when these things, when the perspectives of the individuals are not included as we are thinking about how care is going to be delivered? People delay care, they drop out of treatment, they forgo early intervention, they never reach successful outcomes, and put aside the fact that that's just not equitable, it's ineffective. And we got into this space about 5 to 10 years ago where we're so focused on social determinants of health. And that's lovely. Again, innovation is wonderful. But I will tell you that me as a Lebanese gay woman, living where I live in Connecticut, someone who lives next door to me can have all of those intersectionalities and perhaps one more. And because of that, that individual and I will require different resources to achieve the outcomes that we want. All to say that social determinants of health is wonderful, and I don't want to put that down because it got us here. But what solutions need to start doing is looking at personal determinants of health. And the only way you can do that is if you have a really close relationship with the member that you are delivering care to, and be able and have the tools to pivot and service them in the way that is going to be most effective for them. Next slide, please. So let's talk about what actually works. What I have seen consistently work for the past 25 or so years, and what I have seen really make a difference. And as I talk to employers in our space, this has become table stakes at this point, as they are looking at the resources or lack thereof, the bandwidth, lack thereof, um, and really the need to focus on return and really maximizing the value of each dollar that they are spending within their system. These four things have become really crucial. First, you have to have a solution that has an outcome-driven design. This isn't just offering benefits. We have to be accountable for the results. Second, and this is where awareness comes in, there has to be patient level visibility, because again, you can look at trends and themes and so on, and you are still missing a significant portion of the population. So understanding what's happening at the individual level, not just broad averages. And that's informed data. That's what's going to help you have informed activity as a result of having data. Third, and I talked about this, it's really about human support because these journeys are deeply personal and complex, and you can't put anybody in the same basket because no two people are experiencing the same situation. And fourth, high quality managed provider networks. The access alone is not enough. Quality matters. And as responsible stewards in the healthcare space, we need to be able to deliver on them. So with those things in mind, if we go to the next slide and we talk about sort of our one partner model, instead of fragmented solutions, imagine one partner that is accountable for the entire journey. In our solution, in our space, we're talking about preconception to menopause because these are not separate events. They are connected experiences across a person's life. A woman will start thinking, and men as well, how the kind of families that they want to have long term. If they have PCOS, as an example, and that is not going, that has been undiagnosed, that can lead to a ton of agita. It can lead to a ton of healthcare services. And as you can imagine, a ton of frustration. So being able to engage with the member early on to drive early intervention, to be able to mitigate underlying conditions so that you ultimately are helping people get health care and not sick care, that becomes super important. These are connected experiences across a person's life, as I said, and employees need continuity. They don't need a reset after a reset. I call it sort of analogous to when someone transfers you on the phone and you have to tell your story all over again. We need to do better. And even more importantly, with fragmented solutions, you lose the ability for impact. If you are not engaged with a member across their journeys, there are going to be times where we could have been impactful, but because we were not engaged, we were not able to deliver on that impact. So that's why one partner accountable for a specific set of solutions is really working in this space right now. Next slide, please. I want to talk to you a little bit about care advocates, and I want to go back to a little about what the story that I shared with you when we first started. Um, I have been passionately searching for someone to treat members the way I treated my family. And what I mean by that is I wanted somebody, and I've never been able to find it, frankly, until I joined Progyny, and it is the reason I joined Progyny. Someone who quarterbacked care for their members the way that I did for my parents and my extended family, someone who advocated for them the way that I did, someone who navigated for them. Did I say that already? I might have. I did. I feel like I did a lot for them. But that's so much to put on an individual. And I've never been able to find anyone who quarterbacked that care or cared, frankly, about their members the way I did for my family. And perhaps that's something that is unreasonable to ask for. But that's neither here nor there because we do it at Progyny. And that is why I came here. This isn't a call center. This isn't just an app. This is a real person who is matched to you specifically because of your intersectionalities, who is an expert in the field, who came from fertility clinics to help usher members and steward members through their journeys. They help navigate their care. They help provide guidance every step of the way. And they are there for the clinical things, for the stress things, and for everything in between. They identify risks early, they coordinate care, and they provide culturally competent support. Because inclusion doesn't mean just meeting people where they are. It means meeting them where they are and taking them to where they want to go. To give you a little bit of an anchor of what that looks like here, we are celebrating our 10-year anniversary at Progyny, and we are so unbelievably proud of it. And the individual who actually created our patient care advocates level, she's been with us for 10 years now. And She started out as a patient care advocate, as you can imagine. And to this day, she is still in contact with some of the members that she helped usher through their journey. The kids that she helped to bring into this world send her pictures, they send her letters, and she is still involved in their lives because that's what they want. That level of relationship is what I've always been looking for. And that's what we are able to achieve here with this human support. Let's talk about provider networks on the next slide because this is a really crucial piece. Again, it's not about the quantity or the access, access to quantity. It's the access to having quality. Not all care is equal. And when you create a network that is super large, you lose a little bit of that impact. Doesn't mean that we don't have the largest network in the space. We do. We actually have a network that is larger than that of the health plans. But what we do is that we have about 50 people whose only job at Progyny is to actually manage a network of specialists, fertility experts, doulas, genetic counselors, menopause specialists. And because of that, you can dramatically improve outcomes. It's how you reduce unnecessary procedures. It's how you improve success rates. It's how you manage costs. And it's how you elevate the practice patterns from within the healthcare system as opposed to putting the onus on the organizations to do so, or frankly, on the members to do so. Next slide, please. And Hamza, a couple of more slides, and I promise I'll wrap up. Um, like we've talked, and specifically on this, we cannot have rose-colored glasses and only look at clinical care. This is so much more. Inclusion is about so much more, and I understand I may be preaching to the choir, but it's really about everything around it, all of the dependencies of it. In addition to navigating what's happening from a benefit perspective, in addition to navigating these massive changes in their lives, they're also navigating leave policies and financial stress and returning to work transitions. And who better to help support them through that than those that already understand what they're going through? So when you support those moments, you reduce the stress, you improve engagement, presenteeism, you reduce absenteeism, you create better outcomes, and you create a real connection between you and your members because you are the stewards of this relief for them. And on the next slide, you see that when this works well, the experience is going to change completely. Employees are going to move from confusion to clarity. They know where to go, they feel supported, they trust the system, and they're no longer managing complexity. We're going to manage that for them. They are focusing on their health, their families, and their jobs. And most importantly, as all of these come together, what's really going to become very evident is the improvement in the clinical outcomes, the reduction in high risk cases, and certainly better employee experiences. And I don't want to say that most importantly, there's a real cost impact. I don't think that that is what is most important. But in today's climate, it is what is most important to some people. And in order for us to be successful in actually advancing inclusion, we need to make sure that we are aligning it with basic business performance. And a solution like Progyny that is built with the operational ladders that focuses on the human experience, the network providers, all of the components that we talked about, the provider networks, all of those, that's where inclusion and business performance align, and that is when the value of all of the stakeholders is met. So as we sort of talk about the connected experience on the next slide, you need to have the comprehensive model. Clinical resources are going to optimize the spend in high cost areas, and pulling all of these pieces together is what's ultimately going to help us drive the outcomes that we can trust. So with that, I just want to leave you with a couple of things that I think we've hit at today. Inclusion is not about adding more benefits. It's about incorporating the perspective, the every possibility of every perspective within your member space and ensuring that we show up in the way that members want us to show up in every occasion. It's about designing systems that actually work for real people in real life, for all people in all life, because when you support your employees through the moments that matters most, you don't just improve outcomes. You build the trust, you build the loyalty, and you build a workforce that can truly thrive. So with that, I will leave you all. I'm a few minutes over, but I am more than happy to have further conversations, address any individual or overall questions, whether it's on the session today or afterwards. Isha?